Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this educational webinar on a therapy that's becoming so very important in these days. My name is Siddharth, and I'm the Senior Product Manager with Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. Today, we're going to be talking about the high-flow nasal cannula therapy, and it's my honor and privilege to introduce to you three very experienced clinicians. I would like to welcome Dr. Ayan Banerjee, an anesthesiologist and intensivist par excellence, who is presently associated with the Neothea Get Well Healthcare Center in Siliguri as a consultant and an associate in charge in critical care. The doctor has done DNB in anesthesiology and an IDCCM in critical care from Apollo. With more than a decade in handling emergencies and critically ill patients, Dr. Banerjee is an instructor for ACLS and BLS by the AHA. Dr. Banerjee has pursued different academic pursuits, including teaching and training interns in different subspecialties of critical care. Currently, he is an executive member of the ISCCM Kolkata branch and also a life member of the ISA, ISCCM, and the ISNACC. Thank you so much, Dr. Banerjee, for joining us today, and we appreciate your time. It gives me immense privilege and honor to also welcome Dr. Pradipta Bhattacharya, consultant intensivist at the Neothea Get Well Healthcare Center in Siliguri. Dr. Bhattacharya has a doctorate of medicine in anesthesiology, a degree in the Indian Diploma of Critical Care Medicine, and the European Diploma in Intensive Care Medicine, along with a lot of key skills such as ICU planning and performance, airway management, venous and arterial access, intercostal drain insertion. Dr. Bhattacharya has significant interest in academic interests as well as administrative experience. He is a part of the Indian Society of Anesthesiologists, the Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine, and the Indian Medical Association. We welcome you, sir. I would also like to introduce to you today Dr. G.P. Sabkota, the consultant pediatric critical care medicine and the senior head in Nivedita Nursing Home. With over 2 decades, Dr. Sabkota has worked as a pediatrician with keen interest in treating sick and very sick children. He is often credited with upgrading pediatric intensive care units and neonatal intensive care units, along with conducting a CPAP workshop in the West Bengal state for a very long period of time. We welcome all of you, sirs, and thank you so much for your time. Dr. Ayan, I hand over the podium to you. Thank you.
Good evening, Siddharth, for your nice introduction. And I would like to have a talk upon the use of HFNC in non-COVID scenarios. So during this era of COVID, everybody and everyone in across the board, all of us know about the nasal high flow therapy we have been using for last 2 years. Though it is not a new therapy to us intensivists, because we have been using it for long. I've been using it personally for last 7 to 8 years, and thanks to the Fisher Paykel for their opportunity on giving me this opportunity to talk upon this nice therapy. And I would like to proceed with my presentation. So all of us know that there are a few different categories of oxygen delivery mask. It may be either low flow or it may be high flow. Low flow mask, mainly simple face mask, partial rebreathing face mask, non-rebreathing, or nasal prong. These are actually variable performance devices. And among high flow, there are Venturi mask and HFNC or high flow nasal cannula, which belongs to fixed performance devices. Now, when there are so many of conventional oxygen therapy, why do we need another therapy with a high flow? So drawbacks of oxygen delivery devices, rather conventional oxygen delivery devices, are patient discomfort, dryness of airways, failure to achieve patient demand, inaccurate oxygen delivery, which mismatches with the whatever FiO2 we are setting, and treatment failure necessitating escalation of the therapy. And HFNC and is also compatible in its effect to NIV. But due to poor mass tolerance, sometimes NIV is inapplicable to some patients. The major difference between NIV and HFNC are the interface. Whereas NIV interface increase anatomical dead space, HFNC decreases anatomical dead space. HFNC is the only non-invasive respiratory support device that does not increase the dead space. The simplicity and excellent tolerance of the system is very much attractive. Now it has got two components. Siddharth, how can I minimize this?
So just there'll be a minimize button.
Yeah. So this nasal high flow therapy, we have two components. One is nasal, one is high flow therapy. It is nasal because we use a nasal cannula to deliver the oxygen, and it is high flow because we deliver an optimal humidified blended air at a high flow rate 10 to 60 liters per minute with an FiO2 range of 21 to 95%. Now there are several physiological effects of HFNC. It improves ventilation and gas exchange by reducing respiratory rate, reduces carbon dioxide, it increases the tidal volume, increases end expiratory lung volume, and with doing all this, it provides the respiratory support to the patient by reduction of anatomical dead space, and it provides dynamic positive airway pressure. So overall effect is improved mucus clearance from the nasal passage and improves oxygenation. Another important aspect of HFNC is generation of PEEP effect. PEEP effect is the main difference between the conventional oxygen therapy and HFNC. At the flow rate of 35 to 50 liters per minute, PEEP range provided by HFNC is to around 5 centimeters of water. High flow from nasal cannula meets resistance from the patient expiration, and pressure in the pharynx increases. The degree of this pressure generated is dependent on the flow rate of the HFNC, geometry of the upper airway, oral or nasal breathing, lung mechanics, and leaks present around the nares. So what is the specialty of this HFNC? All of us know that if there is no humidification system, it may cause decreased nasal and respiratory mucociliary clearance that leads to acute damage and inflammatory response of the airway epithelium, disproportionate mucociliary function, and increased airway resistance and bronchospasm, increased walk-off breathing, excessive water loss. Adult patients show less skin damage with HFNC rather than bilevel positive airway pressure treatment. HFNC offers a better balance between oxygenation and comfort rather than NIV. And thoracoabdominal synchrony was better with HFNC rather than with face mask delivery, mostly attributed to the decreased walk-off breathing. So main function from nasal high flow therapy is provision of respiratory support to the patient by reduction of anatomical dead space, provision of dynamic positive airway pressure, ultimately leading to airway hydration, patient comfort, and supplemental oxygen delivery. And this dynamic positive airway pressure that is provided by the nasal high flow therapy is breath and flow dependent and promotes slow and deep breathing and increases alveolar ventilation. It also reduces the dead space by clearing the expired air in the upper airway. It reduces rebreathing of the gas with high CO2 and depleted oxygen, and overall effect is increase in alveolar ventilation. So coming to the HFNC machine that is we are accustomed, it is provided by Fisher and Paykel OptiFlow device. This system uses a heated humidifier with hot plate and single-use water chamber, similar to those for application for non-invasive or invasive mechanical ventilation. A separate or combined air oxygen blender or air oxygen entrainment device and flow meter provide oxygen. An oxygen analyzer is also required. Humidified gas mixture exits the humidifier through large bore corrugated tubing that connects to the cannula. This is the schematic diagram of the different parts of the nasal high flow therapy OptiFlow device. So we can see that there is a flow meter with the high flow range, air oxygen blender, active humidifier along with attachment of heated inspiratory circuit, and ultimately leading to the nasal cannula. This is the machine. So how to start off with the device? We should explain the procedure to the patient. Start off with a bit lower flow, around 20 to 30 liters per minute. Ensure tubing support not to pull on nasal cannula because it is quite heavy and bulky. FiO2 as needed, we should increase from 21 to 100%. Encourage nasal breathing with closed mouth. Flow is increased in increments of 5 liters per minute according to the patient needs. And while weaning off from the therapy, we decrease FiO2 first, then flow. So HFNC is more expensive, but it has got different costlier parts like a blender, analyzer, humidifier, heated circuit, and cannula. But it is a fixed performance device, and it has inbuilt heated humidifier device. Low flow nasal cannula is less expensive, variable performance device, and it is used usually with unheated bubble humidifier. So main goal of HFNC is giving a comfort to the patient by proper airway hydration and provision of optimal humidity. Different indication for any nasal high flow therapy are mainly we use in hypoxic respiratory failure, in different sorts of pneumonia, viral pneumonia, as we are increasingly it is using it in COVID scenario. Pre-oxidation in a difficult airway case to increase the apneic time during intubation. In mild to moderate ARDS, where the PF ratio is less than 150, poor tolerance to mask therapy post-surgical patient with or without ARDS. We can use it for the purpose of weaning off from mechanical ventilation during pre or post interventions like bronchoscopy, in chest trauma, in palliative care or do not intubate scenario, or for home oxygen therapy. Mainly it is used in type 1 respiratory failure and early type 2 respiratory failure patients, COPD, cardiac post-surgery patient, lung trauma patient. Often Optiflow is used for brake therapy from NIV. Contraindication of nasal high flow are inability to protect airway, where there is the consciousness level is reduced, presence of base of the skull fracture, maxillofacial trauma, nasal obstruction, life-threatening hypoxia, foreign body aspiration. We should use it with caution in case of severe agitation, where the patient cannot follow commands, in severe respiratory acidosis, if there is swallow impairment or recent upper GI, airway or neurosurgery, and in case of facial burns. Coming to the hypoxic respiratory failure, it helps in maintaining stable FiO2 and positive pharyngeal pressure. Actual FiO2 values are close to the delivered FiO2. That is the beauty of the machine. Compared to the conventional flow, which is up to the 15 liters per minute, HFNC reduced breathing frequency, heart rate, dyspnea score, and supraclavicular retraction, and improved thoracoabdominal synchrony and SpO2. It can be used for up to 7 days, and it never patient complain of discomfort. HFNC can be regarded as the first line treatment for patients with mild to moderate hypoxic acute respiratory failure. As HFNC does not ensure positive pharyngeal pressure, it has not been recommended for severe hypoxemic acute respiratory failure. Subjects with bacterial pneumonia failed HFNC more frequently than others. When HFNC was applied as the first line treatment in ARDS, 40% of the subjects were subsequently intubated. Compared to the standard oxygen therapy, HFNC provides significantly less NIV and intubation rate with more ventilator-free days. In post-cardiothoracic surgery patients, the failure rate of HFNC and BiPAP was almost equal, which is close to 21%. HFNC showed a trend toward reduction in the intubation rate, which did not meet statistical significance compared to conventional oxygen therapy or NIV, and no improvement in mortality was noted. It is a promising as a primary step in early acute respiratory failure. Treatment with HFNC improved the survival rate among patients with acute hypoxemic respiratory failure, even though there was no difference in intubation rate compared to conventional oxygen therapy or NIV. It may be used in early hypercapnic respiratory failure, though NIV is the primary modality for their respiratory support. But due to intolerability, HFNC can be applied successfully if the patient is not compliant to NIV. HFNC is highly promising in acute hypercapnic respiratory failure in stable COPD patient. HFNC result varied, hence it is not advised for now. Which are the predictors of HFNC failure in ARF? If the patient is extremely tachypneic, persistent hypoxia is there, thoracoabdominal asynchrony, presence of non-pulmonary organ failure, persistent hemodynamic instability, and declined mental status. It may be used for pre-intubation oxygenation. It does not interfere with laryngoscopy and could be used to deliver oxygen during the apneic period of tracheal intubation. Comparing the effects of use of non-rebreathing bag and HFNC on pre and perioperative oxygenation during tracheal intubation, it was found that with the non-rebreathing bag, the median lowest SpO2 achieved during intubation was 94%, whereas with HFNC it was 100%, with significantly less severe hypoxemia. It can be used in post-extubation scenario, though it has no effect in post-operative atelectasis. Compared to conventional oxygen therapy, it has almost same tolerance. Systemic review and meta-analysis of RCTs in adult patients after extubation suggests that conventional oxygen therapy may still be the first line post-extubation management in post-operative patients without acute respiratory failure. The HFNC is not inferior to NIV in patients with risk for extubation failure. HFNC oxygen therapy after extubation in mechanically ventilated ARF patients can achieve a higher success rate of oxygen therapy, improved oxygenation, and a lower occurrence of discomfort than an air to entrainment mask. Hassani et al. In their paper in 2008 had shown that in COPD, it improves mucus clearance due to good amount of humidification. And it causes slowing of the rate of disease progression. Hernandez et al. In 2018 had shown that it reduces the escalation of care to the next level. And it was shown that NHF significantly reduced reintubation rate in comparison to the conventional oxygen therapy. And it has reduced post-extubation respiratory failure. It also reduces escalation of therapy in comparison to the BiPAP. NHF was non-inferior to BiPAP for preventing reintubation, and also it was non-inferior to BiPAP for preventing post-extubation respiratory failure. It also improves the comfort and patient compliance, significant reduction in need for reintubation, already I have told. In emergency department, NHFT can be used, especially in case of hypoxemic patient with high PaCO2, walk-up breathing, and high respiratory rate, or patient if he is dyspneic. So overall clinical outcomes are reduced mortality rate, reduced escalation of therapy. It improves patient comfort and compliance, improved symptomatic relief of the patient. Optiflow also reduced bilevel and mechanical ventilation days. Early intervention may reduce escalation of therapy. It was associated with decreased length of stay, reduced intubation and mortality, reduced reintubation rate. It was non-inferior to the bilevel positive pressure. And it was also economical for spontaneously breathing patients. So to summarize, it improves ventilation and gas exchange and gives respiratory support of the patient, good amount of air hydration, airway hydration causing reduced respiratory rate, and proper clearance of the carbon dioxide, and ultimately resulting into patient comfort with increased tidal volume, increased respiratory lung volume, and it provides supplemental oxygen when required. So it is an excellent therapy, and we should use it quite often as per the indication arises. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for your very insightful and crisp presentation. There are some questions, but I think we'll take it at the end of the seminar. I would now like to invite Dr. Pradipto to share his presentation and give his insights on the use of HFNC in COVID.
Yeah, so hi everybody, and thank you, Dr. Banerjee, for a wonderful deliberation on the use of HFNC in non-COVID situations. And to me, HFNC is something which is relatively new in our resources in fighting hypoxemia, and we got the machines in COVID only. So mainly I have used it in COVID patients or maybe in post-COVID fibrosis patients. Not so much yet in non-COVID situations, but the studies are there to see so that we can actually make good use of this machine in non-COVID scenarios also, as you mentioned in your presentation. Thank you for that. So moving on, we will see what we can do with this machine in COVID situations. So coming to COVID, this is our hospital, the Neotia Getwell. And in a specified floor of this hospital, we have treated a lot of COVID patients who have come in thick and thin with different scenarios, most of them with moderate to severe disease. And we have tried to give them as much oxygen and ventilatory support as possible, and try to looking at the not so very good outcomes with invasive modes of ventilation in these patients. We have tried to keep it non-invasive, and to that we have added this HFNC machine, which actually is another good resource to provide non-invasive respiratory support to the patients of moderate to severe COVID pneumonia. So coming to what we would deal with in the next few minutes, how to start an HFNC in COVID-19 patients, HFNC and or NIV. And I would like to add that we could use HFNC along with NIV for proper results. Monitoring the patient on the HFNC, which is very important. And here the ROX index comes into play. I would also share my experience, as because the topic of today's discussion is our experience with HFNC. I would like to share my experience on what is that I have felt is different with COVID-19 disease and oxygen therapies. Preventing aerosol generation, which is a big issue, which was a big issue in the earlier days of COVID-19 management. Proning with HFNC, that is awake proning, and weaning the patient off the machine. So coming to how to start the machine and when to start. So the people coming to the hospital mostly would have moderate to severe disease. In India, it's a bit different. People also come in for isolation. We're not requiring oxygen at all. We have seen such kind of patients, but most of the patients coming to the ICU, I feel that would require at least moderate amount of oxygen. And if they are not doing well with conventional oxygen therapy, then there are two ways to it. When to start HFNC, we could take the early route, that if they are not doing well with 4 to 6 liters of oxygen, then we could, and not maintaining saturation targets of 93 maybe, and the respiratory rate is not so good. So that's when we could actually move to early move to HFNC therapy, or we could wait and we could put the patient on an RBM, like a non-rebreathing mask, and go up to 15 liters per minute. And if still they have worsening hypoxemia and not maintaining saturation of around 92-93% with respiratory distress, we could then turn over to the other non-invasive strategies, like which includes high flow nasal cannula. And we have to remember that these patients, when we think of where to put HFNC in the like strata of with the other non-invasive respiratory therapies, the patients should not be too sick. Like the patients with PF ratio of less than 300, but more than 150 or maybe more than 200. Those are the patients who would be more eligible for high flow nasal cannula. If the patients have PF ratio, like the PaO2 ratio to FiO2 ratio of less than 200 but over 150, then they could be provided non-invasive ventilation. And we have to remember, if the patients have higher carbon dioxide levels, then HFNC is not the strategy to be taken. The non-invasive ventilation would cater to those patients. And for HFNC, the carbon dioxide levels, PaCO2 levels, should be preferably less than 5 millimeter mercury over the baseline. So that is how we select our patients, and it would be a very vital step. Along with this, another very potent strategy is the awake proning, which we have done very successfully in most of the patients who have been able to comply, and that has given very good results in COVID-19 patient management. So moving forward, there had been a lot of talk about what to prefer in COVID-19 management, thinking of the aerosol generation and the healthcare personnel getting infected. So there was a lot of talk in the earlier stages. So there was a lot of confusion in the guidelines who were giving out that we should not be using these aerosol generation or aerosol disperser kind of non-invasive therapies. Only non-invasive ventilation with preferably with a helmet. I've never used a helmet in India, so that was the kind of talk going on. But later the guidelines came that WHO interim guidelines. A lot of guidelines have come. We have got a tsunami of like information on COVID on the internet and also in standard papers. But the WHO recommended that selected patients, as I mentioned here in the last slide, selected patients could be taken up for HFNC, but not for this cardiogenic pulmonary edema or COPD, the patients who will have higher levels of carbon dioxide and people with hemodynamically unstable patients should not be taken up. And the US department also had that suggestion, and the surviving sepsis guidelines also suggested that the HFNC could be the next modality who were not tolerating supplemental oxygen through conventional oxygen therapy. So this is how the guidelines panned up. And this is a study where this is an older study. This is a non-COVID era study. So Dr. Banerjee had mentioned this study, the Florelli trial, and this showed that HFNC was good at reducing 90-day mortalities, and so it could be used as well as the non-invasive ventilation. But this is not for include the patients of COVID. So I'll move on. Similarly, HFNC has also been shown to, as because the HFNC and the Venturi mask are the only proper like fixed outflow oxygen delivery devices. So again, in comparison to any mask like a Venturi mask, there is lesser dyspnea, lesser mouth dryness, overall better comfort, decreased respiratory rate, and better gas exchanges with HF. This is a paper from Roca et al. Long back from 2010. But I would like to highlight about some key differences we have found in the treatment of COVID-19 patients. The first and foremost I had mentioned that is the aerosol generation, and a lot of talk about how to use, where to use. Most of the people were not getting this negative pressure rooms. In our hospital, we were lucky to get all the beds which were actually made negative pressure generating, all the ICU beds, and with proper HEPA filters in all the rooms. So we were lucky enough. I guess it is one of a kind in the entire state or even the country. So that was good, and we could use all the machines we would like to have used for not fearing so much about aerosol generation. Next is we found whatever the Western data is in our hospital. I am sharing my experience. We have found very poor outcomes with invasive ventilation, as because the people who went to invasive ventilation most of the times could not afford ECMO, or even if ECMO was given for a few patients, they were late, not within the first 7 days, and most did not make it in the long run. And another important feature which I found with this COVID-19 disease is a prolonged single organ failure, initially with very high respiratory distress, but not involving not involving other organs in the form of renal failure or liver failure or coagulopathy or like hemodynamic instability. Most of the patients were there with only respiratory failure, and a very prolonged one. Usually with other kinds of ARDS, we find that it eventually leads to, if the ARDS is not getting better within the first 48 hours or maybe 96 hours, then it leads to multi-organ dysfunction. But the case with COVID-19 disease was something else, and the patients were on this HFNC therapy or NRBM or kind of non-invasive ventilation for very long, more than 7 days, 14 days. So even more than 21 days, we have found many patients with that case. Also unique to this disease is a very prolonged oxygen dependence because of the post-COVID fibrosis or post-COVID ILD, whatever we like to call it. And we have patients who are more than 3 months in our post-COVID ICU. So these patients still require oxygen and have episodic desaturations. So in these cases, we have to be very prudent about how to use our non-invasive oxygen supports or non-invasive ventilatory supports correctly, because they have a lot of issues. We think of non-invasive ventilator with mask on for acute respiratory failure, acute hypoxemic respiratory failure, maybe 48 hours, max 72 hours or 96 hours. But for COVID-19 patients, we have found that these patients could be on this kind of non-invasive ventilatory support for very long, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, even more than a month. And we have had patients with on high flow nasal cannula for more than 21 days. So they had problems, and which were unique to them. And some we would have to decrease the oxygen flows for some patients because they were very anxious and they had nasal problems. Some obviously with the non-invasive ventilation would have bad ulcers on the nasal bridge or on the foreheads, as because they have been using it for very long. They had psychological issues with isolation, not being able to see human faces, only only people with PPE kits. So that issue is also at hand, and it is unique to this disease. So while using non-invasive respiratory support, we have tried to cater different kind of patients who have been with prolonged respiratory failure, and we have tried to use this high flow nasal cannula to the best in these patients, and we have been successful in doing that with patient counseling and proper humidification, and also this heating. So these kind of things actually, the comfort levels, they could eat with the high flow nasal cannula for 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe. So that was also very helpful. Also, patients with this non-invasive ventilation during their meals, we could transfer them onto the high flow nasal cannula and use it along with the non-invasive ventilation rather than using either one. So when we had the like luxury of having both the machines for one patient, that is the time use both together. But in the week where actually patients came in with respiratory failure, we did not have the luxury the two machines for one patient, and we could use whatever we had. So coming to aerosol generation, it's gaseous suspension of fine solid or liquid particles less than 5 millimeters. And as we can see from this, that HFNC actually has a lower dispersion distance of this aerosols than Venturi mask or a jet nebulization mask. And also we could use oxygen or Hudson mask over the high flow nasal cannula to prevent this aerosol dispersion, and also not losing the comfort of the patient. So we could be using that to good effect. That has been done in patients worldwide. And as we can see that the aerosol dispersion is pretty not very high for the HFNC as compared to the non-invasive ventilation or the nebulizer. So coming to the next step, like proning with HFNC, we could use we could actually convince patients to prone to self prone with HFNC, and so this has been useful. And as because the patients were comfortable using the HFNC, they could be actually prone with the HFNC. So that could be really, that was really helpful. And this study also shows, this was a study back, I guess, and half of the patients could be prevented from this intubation with this proning method with HFNC. Next, monitoring the patients on HFNC. This is a very important step because we should know when to actually put the patients on higher or better supports, like non-invasive ventilation or even ventilatory support. So the ROX index gives a good it shows us the way how to do it. And ROX index of more than 4.8, it is actually the ratio of the SpO2 to the FiO2 in FiO2 to the respiratory rate. So when this is done, if we get a number of more than 4.88 at 12 hours, then we are actually happy keeping the patient on the HFNC. So basically, if the saturation is high and the FiO2 is low and the respiratory rate is low, that is when you continue giving the patients HFNC therapy. We monitor it first at 2 hours, then at 6 hours, then 12, and then 24 hourly. And this was not during the COVID times, but earlier. This was a study by Rocao in 2016, and this is followed even in the COVID patients. So the cutoff at 2 hours is if the ROX is less than 2.85. So I would come to the cutoffs, but it is more or less 2.85 at 2 hours. If it is more than 3.85 at 6 or 12 hours, then we should actually hang on. We could actually hang on and continue under close observation. The ideal is more than 4.88 at 12 hours. So this is the number which could show that the patients would not require intubation. If it is lesser, then the patients were at a higher risk of intubation. We also should remember that if the intubation needs to be done, then it should be done within 48 hours. Earlier studies, non-COVID studies have shown that if the intubation is delayed more than 48 hours for ARDS patients or hypoxemic respiratory failure patients on HFNC, the mortalities are higher. So that you should monitor and take correct decisions. So this was another study in Italy, and this is another aspect of COVID treatment, where the patients had to be given non-invasive respiratory supports even outside the ICUs. So how relevant or how safe the non-invasive respiratory supports were outside the ICU, this observational study actually gives us a idea. And it also in fact, the unadjusted 30-day mortality was 16% with HFNC compared to CPAP, or higher mortalities in CPAP and NIV patients. But I would not look a great deal into the mortality, because the patients which we choose for high flow nasal cannula are relatively stable patients, and with no hemodynamic instability and PF ratios more than 200 maybe. So the patients are less sick. So I would expect that their mortalities would be less. And also the intubation rates were pretty similar with all those mortalities, all those modalities of non-invasive respiratory therapies. Another interesting part with the out of ICU non-invasive respiratory support patients, 670 patients, and around 379 this healthcare workers. So around 42 healthcare workers were infected due to, if you call aerosol generation, then it is aerosol generation or somehow other. And it was around 11% of patients, 11% of these healthcare workers actually got infected while working out of the ICU. That is, I would say, out of this negative pressure and all these things, not having HEPA filters. So a lot of COVID patients had to be cohorted together so that we could provide them proper oxygen therapy. So this is what a number we are looking at from a study in Italy. So coming to weaning of HFNC, a successful weaning obviously is the patients who meet the criteria, and after that do not need the HFNC 24 hours after being taken off that machine. And if they need, then it is called a weaning failure. And the criteria would be that obviously the patients would not have respiratory distress and no agitation, diaphoresis, anxiety, arterial pH of more than 7.35, partial pressure of oxygen, that is SpO2 of more than 90% with a 5O2 less than 0.5, respiratory rates of less than 25, heart rate, no tachycardia, and systolic blood pressure stable. So if the systolic blood pressure is not stable, we are not using HFNC in the first place. So this is how to wean off HFNC. So looking at the WHO guidelines, it is something which I told earlier. I would repeat it and go into a bit of what to do or the steps, what the steps would be. So if the PF ratio is less than 300 but more than 200, then we could start off with HFNC with a FiO2 of 100% and a flow of 40 to 30. We will be starting off with a flow of 30 or maybe 40, 50 and go up to 60 liters per minute. And we should observe for 2 hours. So if the ROX index is more than 3.85 and saturation is more than 93 with a respiratory rate less than 25 at 2 hours, we should continue with HFNC. If it is less 2.85 and saturation is also low, respiratory rate is high, then HFNC should be discontinued. So this is an absolute number, 2.85. It is less at 2 hours. We should take an early call and not persist with HFNC. And if it is in between, then we should continue, but observe again the ROX index and the other parameters at 6 hours. So if ROX index is more than 3.85, then we should continue. And that is, even if it is between 3.85 and 4.88, we should continue with HFNC and re-observe at 12 hours maybe. That is the time we should take a call. And if there is any deterioration in the patient condition or clinical status, like consciousness levels, arrhythmias, the vasopressor requirements increase, the pH goes down. So this is the time we should put the patient on higher modalities, that is non-invasive, or if the patient is still amenable to this non-invasive therapy, or maybe invasive ventilation. So this is how it goes for HFNC. And this is a good tool to work with in COVID patients also. And most importantly, that we have got the machines for during the COVID times. And I would think and hope that our first reflexes in non-COVID patients are putting respiratory distress patients to non-invasive ventilation. Might be that now the time has come that in all other patients also, rather than COVID, we could use this machine to good use and help the patients out. Thank you so much for patient hearing.
Thank you so much, sir, for your insightful presentation. I'd now request Dr. G.P. Sapkota to share his screen and give us an insight on the use of HFNC in pediatrics.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Siddharth and the team, for giving me this opportunity to share my knowledge on this important topic, nasal high flow therapy in pediatrics. We have already listened to excellent talks by our previous speakers on adult non-invasive high flow therapy. So I'll be dealing with pediatrics and neonatology. I think we have already covered very important points. So I'll be going very brief. In children, in neonatology, the people started using high flow nasal cannula in the year 2005. So it's been around 16 years used in neonatology. In pediatrics, they have started late because there were no adequate studies for the therapy to be started. So in pediatrics, it's very, very interesting because it's very challenging to do non-invasive ventilation in a child because they are very much intolerant to the mask. The mask has the side effects of being more traumatic to the nasal breeze, to the face, to the delicate skin of the infants and the young children. And the mask, when used, becomes much more claustrophobic, and the child gets frightened, and they are not very much cooperative. So this high flow nasal therapy is very, very important for us. So yeah. So the extrathoracic dead space in children is much more as compared to the adults. Is 3 times more in neonates. It's around 3 ml per kg in neonates, and it gradually decreases to 0.6 ml per kg by the age of 6 years, which is equivalent to the adults. So the dead space is much more in children. The other thing is, in children, the closing volume is very high. So the airways and the lungs are very much collapsible. So there is early atelectasis in infants and young children. So it's better for us to start high flow nasal therapy in children because it gives a little bit of pressure, so that the airways remain patent.
So your slides are not moving.
Okay. So we have already discussed about nasal high flow therapy. So optimal humidified blended air. The flow rate is different in children, 2 to 25 liters per minute, and is according to the weight of the child. It's 2 ml per kg for first 10 kgs, and then for the next 10 to 20 kgs is 0.5 ml per kg. So in a 10 kg child, it will be 10 ml per minute, and in 20 kg child, it will be 15 ml per minute. The temperature is kept between 34 and 37 degrees Celsius. Is provided through a nasal cannula of various sizes, not a fixed nasal cannula. In children, there are four types of cannula. One is for premature baby, the other is for newborn, then for infant and pediatrics. So we have already heard about the effects of low humidity. If there is inadequate humidity in a bypass airway, it can be associated with secretion clearance complications like increased heat and moisture loss from airways, decreased efficacy of gas exchange, drying or thickening of secretions, leading to obstruction of the airways, obstruction of the tubes, then impaired mucociliary transport system. There is compromised airway defense leading to pulmonary infections and other infections, increased compromised ventilation leading to atelectasis, and increased work of breathing and energy consumption. So we need to give optimal humidity of 100% for the mucociliary function to act properly. So when you compare various gases, inspired gases like medical gas at around 15 to 25 degrees Celsius gives around humidity, a humidity of around I think 2 to 3%, and room air at 22 degrees gives humidity of around 15%, and the heated humidified gas at 37 degrees gives 100% of humidity. So what is the importance of optimal humidity? There is overwhelming consensus among clinicians that nasal high flow therapy must use optimal humidified 100% relative humidity and adequate heated gas at 34 to 37 degrees Celsius. So optimal humidity is the level of humidity that preserves mucociliary functions, which prevents airway drying, clears retained secretions, maintains patent airway, allows ease of suctioning, and maximizes patient outcome. So what are the indications of nasal high flow therapy? In infants with respiratory distress and respiratory distress syndromes, with oxygen requirement, and if we feel there is a need for ongoing respiratory support. And in infants with nasal trauma from CPAP, the child is in non-invasive ventilation or in nasal CPAP, and there is associated trauma, we can switch over to high flow nasal therapy. And in post-extubation in infants more than 28 weeks gestational age with CPAP as a rescue therapy if required. So the baby is already on CPAP. We can switch over to high flow nasal cannula after the baby gets stabilized on CPAP. So this is done in babies more than 28 weeks of gestational age. In babies less than 28 weeks, there are not enough data to support the use of high flow nasal therapy. So primary treatment for respiratory distress is the evidence for high flow nasal high flow therapy. In children less than 28 weeks, gestational age, CPAP is the first choice of modality, as there is limited data and insufficient evidence to change clinical practice. So to consider nasal high flow therapy once stable to reduce nasal trauma and head molding in babies less than 28 weeks of age. It facilitates developmental care, developmentally supportive care if we use high flow nasal therapy as compared to the CPAP. In babies between 28 and 32 weeks gestational age, CPAP is the first choice of therapy for respiratory distress. We can expect 80% to avoid the need for intubation in babies between 28 and 32 weeks if they are put on CPAP. And if we put on nasal high flow therapy as the first choice with rescue CPAP, if nasal high flow therapy fails, we can go for rescue CPAP. So we expect around 70% to avoid the need for rescue CPAP therapy when we use high nasal therapy first. In babies more than 32 weeks gestational age, CPAP is the first modality for respiratory support. We expect around 90% to avoid the need for intubation. And if we use nasal high flow therapy first with rescue CPAP, then there is 80% avoidance for intubation and need for rescue CPAP. The choice of cannula, the prong to near ratio should be less than 50% because we need a leak. If there is no leak, if the prong is tightly fitting, then it can lead to inadvertent high pressure and leading to air leaks. The cannula should be of appropriate size. I've already talked. It depends upon the nasal near diameter, and it comes in 4 sizes, different sizes. We can measure the nasal diameter with the help of the device which measures the size of the nasal diameter nears. It should allow natural facial movements with patients when patients' cheeks are compressed. So the child should be moving very freely when the cannula is used. It should improve prong stability in the nostrils, should meet flow requirement of individual patient. So it depends upon the disease state and the weight of the child. Nasal high flow setup. This is, I think we are regularly using bubble CPAP in our units, Fisher and Paykel bubble CPAP. So this is similar to that. The only thing is we don't have the expiratory limb here. So the air and oxygen is blended with a blender, and it goes to the flow meter from where we can control the flow. And in units, it's between 2 and 8 liters. Then this air goes to the valve. This is pop-off valve, pressure release valve. It gives pressure at around 40 centimeters of water, and it goes to the chamber, water chamber, where the water is heated and humidified, and this heated and humidified air goes through this inspiratory limb, which also has a heated wire, and then it goes through the child with the nasal cannula. So what is the clinical evidence for the use of high flow nasal therapy? So in 2011, Shivlar et al. Studied 298 infants of age less than 2 years with bronchiolitis, upper airway obstruction, and cardiac and neuromuscular conditions. The flow used was 8 liters per minute, and there is increasing use of nasal high flow therapy lead to reduced intubation rates in the PICU. Around 7% with the use of high flow nasal cannula as compared to 38% in the non-intervention group. Again, there is one more study from USA, which is published in Pediatric Emergency Medicine in 2012. They included 848 patients of less than 18 years with acute respiratory failure. And with the implementation of an nasal high flow therapy guideline, it was associated with a reduced intubation rate in the emergency department to around 2% as compared to 11% in the non-intervention group. So the introduction and protocolization of nasal high flow therapy in the pediatric intensive care unit led to an observed decrease in rates of intubation in various respiratory conditions. And refining the use of nasal high flow cannula, there's another study from Australia in 2011, which is published in Intensive Care Medicine. They included 298 infants of less than 24 years with viral bronchiolitis at a flow of 8 liters per minute as primary respiratory support. So there was improvement in heart rate and respiratory rate within 90 minutes, used as indicators for therapy success. So we'll have to assess the child within 90 minutes. If there is improvement in the heart rate and respiratory rate, then it suggests the child is a responder and is responding to the therapy. Another study from Australia, 2014, included 94 infants of less than 1 year with bronchiolitis. The flow was 2 liters per kg per minute versus high flow nasal cannula flow at 2 liters versus standard oxygen therapy at 2 liters per minute. So the physiological parameters were used as indicators to identify responders and non-responders to nasal high flow therapy within 60 minutes of therapy. They assessed in 60 minutes here between this nasal high flow nasal cannula and standard cannula therapy of 2 liters per minute. So the patients receiving nasal high flow in the emergency department or ward were 4 times less likely to need PICU admission compared with standard oxygen therapy. So it was 13% as compared to 87%. So the early use of nasal high flow in the emergency department and ward led to a reduction in intubation rates and a reduction in escalation to the PICU. So high flow nasal cannula for the early use outside of PICU. This is a Paris trial The research question was, does the early use of nasal high flow therapy outside of an intensive care unit reduce escalation of care during hospital admission? So there were around 1,472 patients of less than 12 months age. The early use of nasal high flow in the emergency department and wards resulted in a significantly lower rate of therapy failure compared with standard oxygen therapy. So the failure rate was 12% as compared to 23% with the standard oxygen therapy. So nasal high flow therapy may be used early in the emergency department and across the hospital to help reduce the escalation of therapy. So expansion of RCTs and systematic reviews. They're supporting there are studies which support the early use of nasal high flow therapy outside of the PICU. They're suitable as first-line respiratory support or as an early escalation step following standard oxygen therapy. Supporting a starting flow of approximately 2 liters per minute in young infants. There is no additional benefit from starting at 3 liters. There is supporting a role for non-nasal high flow therapy in more severe respiratory illnesses, either as an alternative to or in combination with CPAP. So we can either start with high flow nasal cannula and go to CPAP, or we can wean from CPAP. So they have seen similar intubation rates with these interventions. Nasal high flow therapy is associated with less discomfort and less nasal trauma. Nasal high flow therapy may be more easily tolerated. So it's better tolerated. So it's very important in pediatric age group. So there are other clinical evidences, the use of other pathologies and patient physiologies. There are studies for the use in post-surgical patients, then obstructive sleep apnea syndromes and apnea of prematurity in newborns, general respiratory distress syndromes. There are various studies, asthma and bronchiolitis. The majority of the evidence is for bronchiolitis. So the starting flow we have already seen is 2 liters per minute. We can use in PICU, in the emergency department, in the ward, at home also. So literature suggests nasal high flow therapy outcomes within 60 minutes. So we can assess the child and see whether the child is responding or not within 60 minutes. So what are the clinical parameters to look for? Respiratory rate, if there is 20% improvement in the respiratory rate, heart rate decrease by around 20%. If there is improvement in the walk of breathing, this suggests success in the use of high flow nasal cannula. And caution is to be taken if there is no improvement in the respiratory rate, heart rate, or there is no improvement in oxygen saturation. So in preterm infants, use of nasal high flow therapy, more than 28 weeks gestation, it can be used as post-extubation respiratory support. So after ventilation, the child is extubated to nasal high flow therapy. There is well-established evidence supporting the use of nasal high flow therapy for post-extubation. The nasal high flow therapy as primary treatment, there is emerging evidence comparing the safety and efficacy of nasal high flow therapy versus CPAP therapy for initial respiratory support. We can start either with nasal high flow therapy or CPAP therapy. If nasal high flow therapy fails, then we can switch over to CPAP, and CPAP fails, we can switch over to the ventilation. So setting flow for neonatal population, the flow should be, the minimum flow is around 2 liters and the maximum is around 8 liters. So we can start with 2 liters and go up to 8 liters. Maximum flow is 8 liters. And it depends upon the weight and the gestational age. So less than 2 kgs, the flow is less, and more than 3 kgs, the maximum flow is more. It can go up to 8 liters. So setting flow for infant population, dose by weight approach using 2 liters per kg per minute formula. So there is physiological and clinical evidence supporting flows equal to or above 2 liters per kg per minute in the infant population. However, there is no evidence to support this approach in preterm infants or older children or adults, but we use the formula 2 ml per kg up to 10 kgs and then 0.5 ml per kg after 10 kgs. Thank you. Thank you for the patient hearing.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for your insightful presentation. We do have a couple of questions. Dr. Ayan, the first question is for you. Have you seen or used HFNC in type 2 respiratory failure, especially if PCO2 levels are above 50 mmHg?
No, obviously not.
Okay, sure. And any experience, doctor, in peri-intubation? What would be your take on using HFNC in peri-intubation?
I have never used it personally for pre-intubation scenario, but it can be helpful in some scenario where there is to be difficult intubation, mass ventilation may be difficult, so where the oxygenation is necessary, but we cannot hold the mass properly, we can use it for delivery of oxygen.
Right,
But I have not used it personally.
Could I just add? Yeah,
Sure.
to this pre-intubation part. So,
Yes, doctor.
So in India, there are few aspects which are not talked about. Okay. If a patient is already on HFNC and then is going to be intubated, so that is when we could use the HFNC for pre-oxygenation. That is fine. But if the patient is not on an HFNC and using it just for pre-oxygenation, I don't think it's an option. It's a valid option because
Actually,
it would involve a lot of cost. Okay.
Actually, it is a continuum of care. It is a continuum of care.
Yeah. So if the patient is on NIV before intubation, we use the NIV for pre-oxygenation. If he or she is on HFNC, we use the HFNC for pre-oxygenation. And during the intubation process, we could use like nasal cannula because it will not hinder the intubation process. So that would always help in this maintaining the apneic flow during the times of intubation. So that is there. There is an ongoing trial, I guess, or a recent trial in 2019, the Florali 2 trial, which is dealing with the HFNC versus NIV for pre-oxygenation. But for us, it is a continuum of care sort of thing. Okay.
Right.
So
very interesting point, doctor. And if I were to ask you, how important would heated humidification be, irrespective of whether the patient is intubated or is on high flow? How important is this aspect of heated humidification, especially around mucormycosis and all of those?
Yeah, it's very important. See, the one thing which our natural protective mechanisms of the ciliary epithelium of our airway provides is this thing. When we put patients on invasive ventilation, we either put them on HME filters or have a heated humidifier. So we have to maintain the humidification and also the heated mechanism at all costs. During intubation, it is taken away because of the endotracheal tube. But with the HFNC, we need to maintain. I would like to add, as because in COVID patients, we had to use this, we had this issue of this heating, and I had to call up the Fisher people, especially Mr. Amitabh. We had a word with him on a couple of times that the patient used to have a very heated sort of experience whenever the temperatures were being maintained. So that there was a psychological issue as well. I had to sometimes intermittently stop the humidifier for few minutes or maybe an hour or so to get her temperatures down. She would say that she would have this feeling of hot flushes. Okay. So this was as because COVID is something we have seen that these non-invasive supportive therapies have gone on for very long than expected. So these are the things which were not in calculation when we were saying that max to max a 7-day therapy with an HFNC, max 7 days, I guess, for acute respiratory hypoxemic respiratory failure. But for COVID-19 patients, we have dealt with some unique problems which I tried to put up in my discussion, where the patients were on these kind of therapies for a very long period. So that was there. But obviously with HFNC, the humidification part is better. And another thing to add to this is a technical issue, I would say. One is the nebulization which has to be given with the HFNC. I was seeing that people were getting nebulization through a separate nebulization mask while being on the HFNC. Then I learned that there is a separate circuit for this.
Yes.
That was very unusual for me. Okay, so the HFNC was there, but there was separate mask for the nebulization. And another is the filling up of the humidifier chamber. So that's a real issue because we in our country we don't have this proper like sterile water bottles, isn't it? So
Yes.
the either liquid should be provided, material should be sterile water, but we have normal saline bottles, and we can't pierce the slurry or bottle. So we had to fill it up number of times, or we had to use this normal saline, because once the levels went down from the mark, then it caused a lot of problems for our patients. So that is a real challenge, and the nurses had to be very careful because the patients would know when to fill this up, and in the middle of the night the consultant is not there. So all the staff and the doctors, resident doctors, should be very careful. Even I think, sir, for the babies, for the pediatric population, it becomes very important that if the levels of the water goes down, then it becomes a real this challenge, heated challenge actually, I would say. So these are one or two technical issues which I found during treating patients on HFNC.
Right.
So if any other thing.
And
Many-
doctor, did you combine and use NIV and HFNC in certain patients that you treated with COVID?
Yes. That's what I wanted to say. It is, if we have the luxury of having both the machines together. So if we have the luxury in COVID times, we didn't have the luxury to have two machines together for one patient. So if we have the luxury, we would definitely want to use NIV with HFNC rather than comparing NIV or HFNC. So we could combine both so that the effects are longer lasting. Because during feeding times, if we take off the NIV and we place this thing, HFNC, even if their mouths are open, then we can provide at least some 1.5 or 2 centimeter of around PEEP. And the flows are higher, so the FRCs are better provided. So that is obviously better than the nasal cannula, where we can give up to max 6 liters per minute of oxygen flow. So definitely together is better, in my opinion, of course.
And doctor, there was no dogma associated with aerolization with HFNC. Most of the paramedics and the nurses were confident to
No,
use.
Initially, it was
we were lucky. We were lucky in having the units. All patients were negative pressure units in our ICU, in our COVID ICU, with HEPA filters fitted in all the rooms. So we were very lucky. So initially, obviously, there were problems with healthcare workers getting infected for all reasons. Intubation was a problem. Everything was a problem. But later on, I think this was when the understanding was better. We could use this masks over the HFNC maybe, and this things came up in medical literature also, how to reduce the aerosol generation or dispersion of aerosols in COVID-19 patients.
Thank you, doctor. Dr. Sapota, there is a question, in fact, a couple of questions for you. The first one being, how has been your experience with HFNC in pediatric COVID?
There is no experience with the use of HFNC in pediatric COVID, because most of the patients we treated were post-COVID, that is multiple inflammatory syndrome in children. So we didn't use high flow nasal cannula in this patient group. I don't have any experience over the use of this high flow nasal cannula in COVID patients.
Right. So on the similar lines, there's been a lot of literature that speaks about a lot of confidence in more than 28 weeks, where they use HFNC. Have you seen or experienced, doctor, in use of HFNC in less than 28 weeks?
We have used in babies less than 28 weeks when the baby is on CPAP for some time, and there is trauma to the nasal septum or the airways. When we switch over to high flow therapy, because this is much more comfortable and this is less traumatic. So we have used and we have successfully used in those babies.
In fact, the papers also, doctor, I think you'd agree, say the same thing, whether it's from Dr. Bradley Yoder or Dr. Collins, they say that HFNC is non-inferior to CPAP. So would you recommend, doctor, that we use CPAP, like bubble CPAP, with HFNC alongside, and have CPAP still present as rescue?
Yeah, I think the studies also have shown that the use of high flow therapy is effective, and if there is if the patient is not responding, then we can always switch over to the CPAP. It's always better to start with high flow and switch over to CPAP if required.
Right. Last question to you, Dr. Sakota, is pediatric calculation rate of flow rate in HFNC. If you could please elaborate that.
Okay. In neonates is we start with 4 to 6 liters per minute, and the minimum is 2 liters and the maximum is 8 liters in neonates. And in infants and children, is first 10 kgs is 2 ml per kg. Suppose if the child is 8 kgs, then 2 8 is 16 liter per minute is the flow. That is the maximum flow. It's the maximum flow. And beyond 10 kgs, we'll add 0.5 liters per kg. So if the child is 12 kgs, first 10 kgs is 2 ml per kg is 20 ml. And we'll add 1 ml for the next 2, 0.5, 1 ml. So it will be around 21 liters per minute of flow. That will be most of the time is the maximum. We start with minimum flows. So if we talk about absolute flows, then up to 8 liters for neonates, up to 12 liters for infants and toddlers up to 2 years of age, and then in children up to 25 liters, and adolescent age group, we can go up to 30 to 40 liters per minute.
Right. Thank you so much, doctor. I think most of the questions have been addressed. Thank you, Dr. Banerjee, Dr. Bhattacharya, and Dr. Sakota for your valuable time. We appreciate the time you have taken out and helped us understand on this therapy and how it improves patients. Thanks to ACME for helping us with the platform. I would like to wish all of you a very good night, and please stay safe, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.